Good morning, everybody. We are so excited that David Mallette, the president of Management Consultants for the Arts, is joining us this morning for Raising the Bar. This is our second episode in our online library or series giving information to create the next generation of leaders in dance, both on the administrative and the leadership side. David, welcome.
Thank you, Liza. I'm so pleased to be with you.
You have an extraordinary background, and not the least of which is that you were a former president of Dance USA, spent a lot of time giving back to the community, which I wanted to put up front, right with your ascension to president of Management Consultants for the Arts. We worked together on at least one other project. Your current clients include Pittsburgh Ballet Theater, San Francisco Ballet, woot woot, Jacob's Pillow, Cincinnati Ballet, Go Jody, and Dance USA, Dance NYC, other dance companies and organizations throughout the country. And I know you also work in the theater.
Yes, our firm works across performing arts disciplines, but because of my background, I have the pleasure to work on a lot of our dance and especially ballet projects.
And there is a lot going on right now. There is a ton of turnover, change, iteration in ballet and in dance, which is, I think, what makes it such a perfect time for us to be talking.
Yeah, it's kind of breathtaking, the amount of change going on. I've been doing this in this field, either as a practitioner or a consultant, over 35 years now, which is kind of also sort of a humbling number to have to say.
Well, you started when you were 10, so that explains
it. Right. But I've never seen this much change at any one time. So there's lots of change means lots of opportunity.
Lead, follow, or get out of the way. It really is, I think. Can we keep up with the change? And the economics and the dynamics of the industry are changing quickly as well, which feeds right into what we're going to be talking about, which is applying for artistic and executive director positions in and around ballet and dance companies. And that could be venues, that could be festivals, that could be a company itself. So we have a lot to talk about, so I'm just going to get right to it. Let's talk about, I want to go straight to dance and then we'll open it up to arts in general. Let's talk about what it's like to apply for and to run a search for an artistic or an executive director, and you can differentiate the two as you need to at a ballet company or a dance company.
Yeah, it's, I think, first thing to remember, it's always a multi-step process, and it takes time to get through these processes, and there's almost always a committee made up of a subset of the board, sometimes some other folks on that committee. There might be in a ballet search, there might be some artists on the committee, maybe perhaps even some other staff. If it's a co-leadership structure, the co-leader is almost always going to be on that committee. If it's an artistic director search, the executive director would be on the committee as well. So I think the thing to know is that a lot of folks who are doing the hiring, who are, God bless them, devoted to the organization, but aren't practitioners in the industry, which is quite often why staff and artists will be invited to come in order to have that perspective and in a body of knowledge. So that's not I don't mean in any way to sound critical. I've over the years become more and more appreciative of the trustees who give their discretionary time to support these kinds of organizations. But it is a unique industry in that your boss ends up being a group of people, and that group is a group of volunteers and mostly not practitioners in the industry.
Yeah, and I think that having sat on that side of the search committee, for different organizations, it's really important for board members to understand their own limitations. But if you've been with a company for 30 to 40 years, given a large amount of money, you get a proprietary sense, which can be good and can be bad, but you've also seen sort of changes in iterations. One of my concerns has always been, which is why DDP's board skews really young, is that very often the biggest donors get to be on the board and they may not be as familiar with some of the changes, some of the new thinking that's coming through. So I'm a big proponent personally of hearing from a lot of different, employees, people on the staff, et cetera, because I think you end up with better candidates. Okay, so let's assume that I am interested in applying for one of these positions. And first of all, yay that there's a published job description. Very often in the past there wasn't, right?
Well, not in searches that we do. It's always going to be a public,
Right.
transparent process. But certainly in years past, there have been organizations that have done sort of a quiet, by invitation only type of search process. That's less and less, almost non-existent at this point. I'm happy to say, at least in my observation.
Yeah, and I'm really surprised. I mean, this is my lawyer background, but how often people don't actually read the job description. They just assume it's boilerplate. But I'm starting to see some real thought and real energy being put into that job description. And you can get a sense of where a company's priorities are. Reading the mission, which I think people forget to do. It's like, oh, it's an AD position. I'll apply because I want to run a ballet company. But I think looking at the mission statement and also then actually really reading the job description is super important.
Yeah, and we work. We spend a lot of time up front in a search, working with the committee. Also, as you said, talking to lots and lots of folks within the organization, staff, artists, to get a sense of culture and values and where the organization is going. The kind of leadership skills that you need at this moment may not be what you're going to need to 5 years from now, as the organization is making its logical evolution. So I and my team, we work really hard in that job profile to give a sense of priorities about where the organization is going, and as you look at the responsibilities that are listed in a profile, you can almost, unless it really hasn't been a thoughtful process, you can almost guarantee those first 3 or 4 priorities of responsibilities are what matters most in that particular organization.
Yeah, and I really like what you said. It sort of mirrors what we were talking about at the beginning of the interview, that things are evolving very, very quickly, and that the skill set that people needed to successfully run a company 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 or 6 years, may not be the same as what's required now. Can you talk a little bit, again, going back to me as a candidate, some of the misconceptions that I might have about the process, how decisions are arrived at, what I need to know in advance?
Yeah, it's probably not as it's not as mysterious as everyone tries to make it out to be. It is a funnel, right? If there's a recruiting firm involved, and there's not always, by the way, certainly if an organization is trying to do an entire artistic or executive search in-house, that means it's being run by volunteers. Probably not a lot of active recruiting going on in that particular search. It's just looking at what the applications are that are coming in, and it's going to be harder to have a more regimented kind of process if it's a volunteer-run organization process. For us, parallel with putting the profile out in the public, advertising it in various platforms, we're also doing active recruiting. In some searches, we may be reaching out to 125, 150 people in the both nominators and potential candidates. So lots and lots and lots of outreach that will hopefully then generate applications coming in. I think one misconception is that just because a recruiting firm has reached out to you and asked you to apply, that doesn't guarantee you an interview with the committee.
I didn't know that. That is a misconception. I would have thought that would be hey, we've heard good things about you. We really want you to apply.
And that may, in fact, be our position. We know your work. We want you. We even then, a committee, once we make our recommendations, a committee is going to decide who they will interview on that
Yep.
first round.
Yep.
So one of my boilerplate comments to candidates in the very first conversation is that I can never guarantee you an interview with the committee. And that's a disappointment. But, a committee is probably going to interview 6 to 8 people. It's the rare committee that's going to go more than that in a first round.
Okay, that's also super useful information. And I think one of the things that candidates tend to forget on the flip side, as you said, is even with a recruiting firm in place, there's a lot of information to sort through, and these people are volunteering their time. And if they're doing it right, which I would imagine, fiduciary duty, but also investment in the organization, people really want to do it right. It's a ton of time on their side as well.
It's a ton of time. A first round, you figure about an hour and a half for each person. And then if you've got a committee of 10 people, times 10, that's probably going to be close to 20 hours. Plus there's always the preparation time.
I was going to say, let's add in the prep time, right?
Prep time with the committee. Then there's a debrief. And then the decision meeting. You've met all of your round one interviewees. Do you want to expand the pool, or do you want to now winnow it and move into round two? All that's probably 20 plus hours of time per person for the committee. It's not insignificant for.
Yeah, and having sat on those committees, just trying to get everybody together, even if it's on a Zoom call, that alone takes a huge amount of back office administrative time.
Yeah, the scheduling is.
I want to circle back just briefly, though, David, to something that I think people don't realize. You are not just a gatekeeper. You aren't there to say no to people. One of the things that I've really found fun talking to you and working with you and at other consulting firms as well is you are actually there to help, right? It's not a gotcha process where you're trying to eliminate people and trip people up. And I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that. And also, if not this one, maybe another one. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about your role interfacing with candidates and also why it's useful to apply, even if you don't get this particular job.
Yeah. Well, hopefully a firm like ours gets hired because of our knowledge of the industry and good judgment. So one of the things that we have heard from candidates over the years is that they trust us if we are making a case for them to apply, or on the other side saying this one is really not going to be right. You're not going to be competitive on this particular search. That can be hard to hear, obviously, but better to have that candid conversation than to sort of drag somebody along and give them a rosy picture where they're not going to necessarily advance. And of course, Liza, with some of these artistic director openings, I mean, these are incredibly competitive. Just unsolicited applications. We will have dozens and dozens in some instances, plus all of the outreach that we're going through. And again, by the time we get through all of those numbers, it often will be in excess of 150, 175 in some instances. People, it really is sort of breathtaking. So, and only one person gets the gig at the end of the process, right? So, one thing that I'm gonna back up and start with a different sentence. A search firm works for the organization. They work for the employer. Any legitimate search firm,
right?
We don't work for individuals. That said, if we can't have relationships of confidence and trust with individuals, we can't serve our clients. And so it's fair game for you as a candidate or a potential candidate to know, how is my information going to be used? Who's going to see it? Who's going to be reviewing it and when? Because confidentiality is often a big concern.
So let's talk about that a little bit. What kind of information will candidates, applicants be asked for, and how will that information be used?
Every firm is going to be a little different, but certainly always you're going to be asking for a CV, resume, and cover letter. And we generally will ask upfront for 3 or 4 professional references. The in some instances, we may be asking the candidates to answer a few questions as screening devices on topics that are important to our clients. There are firms that will reach out to candidates unsolicited. It's always unsolicited when we're reaching out, right? And then share those names that they're reaching out to with their clients. We don't do that. We think that that's we think that's a breach of ethics. That candidate, that individual has not asked us to reach out to them. And I've seen the reports in some of our clients' files that have worked with different firms that and found out from candidates, I never applied for that. I didn't know that they were I didn't know that they were banding my name around. So again, not every firm is going to have the same sort of ethical boundaries on this. Some wouldn't even see it as an ethical question necessarily.
Some people would, some people would not. How do you escape the thing of calling the same 40 people? I mean, you and I have talked about this before, and that's why we created the leaderboard. And I've had this extraordinary situation where talking to people about potential candidates, they're like, oh, I forgot about her, or, oh, how do you get in touch with her? It was just amazing. How do you break out of this? And unfortunately, up until recently, very often mostly male, mostly white candidate pool. What do you affirmatively do to find new people, to find new names, to bring people along?
Well, we keep expanding our initial outreach list. People like you. I didn't a year and a half ago. I didn't know you. I knew your work, but I didn't know you. And a couple of things internally that we have done. One of our practices now is that we almost always will have at least 2 people on a search. We will almost always, if one of those is not a female or a person of color, we will bring in a field advisor, a current practitioner, to work with us to make sure that our blind spots are pulled down. Blind spots, by definition, are blind, and to add to and to add to our names. I mean, listen, the first 20, sometimes 30 contacts in a search that are the most important are people who are not likely to be candidates, but people who are in the industry, both that we know or that may be new relationships to us, but will know folks that we should potentially be talking to and can add to that list. I mean, look, we've got a pretty extraordinary database at this point.
I bet.
We've put a lot of effort into it. And of course, at this moment, as there should be, there's always a drive for a diverse slate of candidates. Now, we can bookmark diverse. What does that mean to a particular client? That's
raising my hand here to have DE&I policies include gender, by the way.
Which they don't always, often don't, as you know. And look, these are questions that we can't ask of candidates in terms of their demography, in terms of their sexual orientation, and yet there's an expectation that we're going to bring a broadly diverse slate of candidates.
So that's a great point, David, and I hadn't actually thought about that. You can't say to a candidate, "Are you Black? Are you female? What is your sexual orientation? How do you
identify as a person of color?"
People who, to the outside world, might look exactly the same may self-identify very differently, and you have to respect that, which is super important. I love the idea of the field advisor. I didn't I didn't know about that. And so this is all the back work that you have to do to get ready to interview candidates. I got to ask the question because everybody's going to want to know, when do you know when you're ready to apply to run a company? And when do you know you're not ready? And then follow-on question, how do you get this? How have the skills changed? Boy, there's a bunch of questions. How is the skill set required changed? And how do you get those skills?
Yeah. You and I have talked about this, and this will sound, I'm going to take the risk of sounding sexist when I say this, but traditionally, even if they don't hit the majority of the criteria, men will apply because
I could do this.
Yeah, what the hell? I mean, what's there? And women will often take a more evaluative look and a more self-critical look.
Yep.
And
yeah, like every time we look in the mirror, we find all our faults. This is actually something out of sports psychology. When a woman loses a race, she blames herself. When a dude loses a race in competitive things, he will blame external circumstances.
I think that's, at least on the male side, I think that's a fair assessment. I haven't walked in a female's shoes, so I can't be, but take your counsel on that. Yeah, look, and listen, as a recruiting firm, there are certain applicants, generally male, that will apply for everything. And that gets tiresome. I like to use the 2/3 rule.
Okay.
Quite often in the profile documents that we are writing, you will see the phrase, when it gets down to the criteria section, it'll say, no candidate will meet all of these, but the committee will be judging using this list.
Yep.
As their guide. As a candidate, I like to use the 2/3. If you can make a case for 2/3 of those criteria, especially if you can make a case for the first 3 or 4, which are going to be the most important.
And again, as you said, read the jobs description, because people are not trying to hide the ball. That's the priority, right?
Yeah, those are the priorities. That's right. Then, other than the time, and that's not insignificant, but to prepare, to thoughtfully prepare your materials, there really is nothing to lose. And again, this is a moment of opportunity, tectonic shifts in the way that the boards are thinking. It's not moving as quickly as people think it might be, but
Yep.
it is moving. And this is a time of opportunity. So I'd use the 2/3 rule.
Okay.
If you can't, and that's David Mallette's demarcation. That's not.
We're not going to hold you to this, but it is useful. If you're at 50%, 45%, and you want to get to the next level, I think we've skirted around talking about this together, but where do you go to get the education, the job experience, et cetera, that you need? Particularly, not everybody has the time or the resources to go for a master's in arts administration, or I don't know, how do you plug the holes? How do you gain the experience that you might need? And what are the most critical skills? I mean, we're going to do a session on how to read a balance sheet, because I think that one's super important, and numbers intimidate a lot of people, particularly, I hate to say this sounds sexist, but particularly a lot of women.
Yeah. And I've had plenty of male candidates, especially artistic director candidates, that were intimidated by balance sheets as well. So, that one is perhaps
universal,
non-discriminatory, right? Look, the thing is, a board is looking to hire organizational leadership. So leading other processes, even in small organizations, or taking on big project management, it's all about managing people and money and processes, and in some instances, buildings.
Interesting.
I mean, you take an organization that has a huge facility and they own it and they maintain it. That's financially, that may be their number one strategic priority. And so people don't like to think about it that way, but you've got to feed the beast, the overhead beast.
Yep.
Every job, every leadership position these days, there's going to be 98% of the time some fundraising responsibility. Look for any opportunity, even if it's as a volunteer. What does fundraising really look like? And to be involved in that. Look for people management. Even if it's volunteer, to accomplish a thing that requires hurting human beings and getting them to collectively work toward a particular task. I started as company manager. I started operations director at the Alley Theater, and then went to company manager position at Houston Ballet, which is the most thankless job in a big ballet. I would say it's a lousy job by many definitions.
That tells me that we need to interview some operations managers to let people know what that job looks like.
Right. But you know what it did?
What?
It gave me access to everybody in the organization. I had no authority, but I had lots of responsibility to get things done. And I could get to everyone from the CFO to the artistic director to the janitor. And
hang on a second. That sounds like a hell job, but you're saying it's actually the best job to have because you had no authority, but all the responsibility?
I had a lot of responsibility to get things done. Company manager is one of those, my then boss described it as, think of rocks in a glass. Fill it up with water. The company manager is the water between all the rocks.
Oh boy. For global conversations, we did talk to a couple of company managers, and I think we've got a checklist up on our website, and the level of responsibility is absolutely incredible.
Right.
So you're saying, because we need to move on to the next question, but what I'm hearing from you is a diverse background in terms of responsibilities and folks that you work with at a ballet company or a festival or a venue is super useful.
I'm saying the operations work that I did at the Alley and the company manager job gave me a real sense of everything going on in the organization, which as an executive director was really, really valuable.
So what, as a candidate, walk me through briefly what the search process looks like. And then the second question is, what are some common misconceptions?
Yeah. One of the I'll get to the first question momentarily. One of the common misconceptions is that you got to close the deal at each step. It's a multi-step process, and at each step, the job is not to get the job. The job is to get to the next step until you get to the last step. And we see a lot of people trying to close the deal way too early. Number one is having serious materials that they're clean, they're not full of typos. There's no such thing as a standard cover letter. Your cover letter, the resume is all about you. The cover letter has to be about the organization and you, right? They're hiring somebody to meet their leadership needs. So connecting their great needs with your great gifts, that's what that cover letter needs to do. So it has to be personalized, that portion of it for each
One of the things in talking to some potential artistic directors and even executive directors that I've spoken with is they keep talking about my vision. What I don't hear them doing is connecting it with that particular city, that particular company, that particular venue's background and history. And I think that is the extra work that a lot of candidates really should do.
You're spot on, Liza. Nobody's hiring you to make you happy as their primary motivator. They're hiring you to bring organizational leadership, and artistic vision is, in our firm's view, artistic vision is always in service to organizational vision. And if that profile doesn't give you a sense of the organization's vision, that's what you need to be exploring if you decide to enter that process.
Yeah. And so again, boring me, the attorney, go back to the mission statement, go back to the job description. And I would also say, I've said this over and over to people I talk with, have a look at the Chamber of Commerce's website for the city for which you're applying. You need to have some idea of the demographics and the individuality and what's specific to that city. I know that hasn't been true in the past. You see directors of operas, director of ballet companies, directors of symphonies, museums, surf in, land. They're really focusing on what their colleagues think internationally, but I don't think that works anymore as well. And I'd like your comments on that.
Well, at this moment in time, there's so many organizations who are replacing their founders, or in many instances might as well be founders, who most assuredly their artistic vision also set the organizational vision.
Yep.
If it's a founder, the board has never hired their artistic leader. The organization, so there tends to be a conflation of those two in the search committee's minds. The next leader is taking over a lot of community commitment, a lot of organizational commitment, and to be able, there is a Venn diagram of organizational leader vision and artistic vision. They have to be aligned, but they're not the same thing. And again, I think one has to be in service to the other. And so if one surefire way to have a failed search is for the committee just to say, what's your vision of us?
Yeah.
And we do.
But I mean, I understand that could be one of the questions, because a search process is also or it should be self-reflective, but that's kind of a black box. I think that's a little unfair. You got to tell candidates what they're looking for. Because we're tight on time, give me some sort of numbers, the amount of time it can take to prepare materials, the amount of time the interview process can take. Just walk me through at each stage what's going on, because I think candidates don't realize how much time it's going to take. And then I want to talk about the F word, and I'll say what the F word is in a minute.
Executive director searches 4 to 5 months. Artistic director searches 6 to 8, sometimes 9 months, depending on whether they're going over the holidays or summer. Artistic director searches take longer because there's candidate availability becomes tricky.
Yep.
They may be directing or producing or choreographing, and so getting them in, especially in that second round. For a candidate, it's almost impossible to over prepare materials and over prepare yourself for the interview process. We are meeting with any candidate that is being invited forward to the next step, invited into round 1, invited into round 2. We're meeting with them in advance, not to coach them, here's what you need to say, but to make sure that they're framing themselves and their stories and understand what is going to be important to the committee as they go through this process. In round 2, we're generally asking our committees to come up with a homework assignment, a presentation for the candidates. So often we will see that's where the finalist actually gets the job. They want to know how you think strategically as a leader, artistic leader or executive leader. So it would be hard to overstate the importance of the time preparation. And these can be tough because all these folks generally have a day job. And,
I was going to say, that's what I wanted you to discuss, is the amount of time involved.
Yeah, it's significant, and but by the time that finalist gets the job, they likely have put in 30 or 40 hours.
That's what I was getting to, and you should be prepared for that. I think it's a surprise to some folks. All right, I'm going to throw the F-bomb. Failure, not getting the job. What can you learn from it? How can you deal with it? Will you talk to people if they don't make it past a certain round? Do you explain why? How to deal with it? dealing with quote failure, and sometimes failure is not a hero's journey. It's just you didn't get it right.
Only one person does.
And I think it's really important to manage expectations and also to deal with your own emotions.
Yeah, and it's not a small thing. Yes, one of the reasons that potential candidates return our calls is because one of our core values is dignity and respect. We anybody that has gotten to an interview stage with a committee, and then it's whatever point didn't get to move forward, we're doing some kind of a debrief conversation with them.
Okay.
Uh, a lot of firms, I think, do not do that. But we think that that's fair, especially given the amount of time. And look, statistically, you can get much better odds in Las Vegas than getting one of these jobs.
Woo.
If we're, I mean, one person gets it, and if we're reaching out to 125, 150 people, and even by the time we get down to our list of recommended candidates, 8 to 10. So let's say you got a 1 out of 10 chance, right? But if you don't but on the other hand, somebody is going to get that job.
Yep.
And so much better odds than the lottery. So
it sounds to me like that debrief, though, is an extraordinary opportunity for a candidate to learn, to improve their resume, to really listen. And I'm assuming that you take time and energy and are thoughtful about the debrief, about the feedback, because you eventually might want to come back to that person.
We do. It's surprising. It's a minority, but it is surprising how many people don't take advantage of that debrief.
Yeah. Yeah. But I one of my dear friends was the bridesmaid on a massive corporate job, sort of Fortune 40, Fortune 50, flew the spouse down, hundreds of hours in some case preparation, overall time. And it took her until round 3 or sort of going all the way through the process, round 4, until she finally got the job. One of the things I really want to stress to folks who might be listening is if you don't get it the first time, don't give up. Right.
That's cool. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the farther along in your career goes, the longer a new search process will take. And it is easy to get discouraged if you've applied for 3 or 4 or 5 of these. But quite often the people that we see are getting the jobs they have done it. They have honed their skills. Yeah. How often do you get to interview? And if you get to be in one of these processes and invited in,
it is a learning opportunity, at least.
That is invaluable experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to frame it around failure, but it's obviously it's not failure. It's an opportunity to learn. And God knows at age almost 64, I've failed until you don't. Let's talk. I'm going to bridge to that. Let's talk about personal demands and family life. And I want you to talk a little bit about the fact that you know something about this, because I think it's really important that folks understand that when you're interviewing them, you know what this is like.
So many folks. I mean, you've got significant others. You've got kids, and these. And again, these are things that we can't ask about. On the one hand, these are critical decision makers in these processes. And we do encourage candidates, if there is a significant other in your life, you need to make sure that they're coming along on the journey with you. I was a single dad for 10 years while I was an executive director at Texas Ballet Theater. And, schlepping my daughter to the theater or having her sitting in my office on those late nights. I know firsthand, and there are many folks, and there were many folks on the board that were not supportive. And if I needed to leave at 5 or 5:30 to go pick up my daughter, or just step out for an hour or two to go to some school function, I got a lot of criticism for that. And I, always felt like I had to work even harder and so, I mean, I know how a lot of women who moms have been dealing with this for millennia now, and you got to work twice as hard to look half as good, and that's how it feels, at least.
And my hope is obviously that because you have been in that position when you're leading the process, you're sensitive to it. Obviously, I mean, one of my issues is that there seems to be a preference for white men without children, in part because, and I'll just say men without children, in part because, if they need to be at the theater at 2 a.m., they can be, which is why I'm so militant about, childcare, paid leave, et cetera. As we're finishing up, give me sort of back and forth, where you see the industry going, sort of big changes overall that candidates should be aware of, and then common mistakes in the search. And then finally, what makes this fun for you? What makes you want to get up in the morning and do a candidate search? Because it's got to be fun at some point, right?
Yeah, listen, helping our clients identify leaders of the next generation is pretty exciting for me. And I think one of the biggest changes that I have seen is there is a view of where the artistic organization sits in the community, what their relationship with the community is. When I started, it was, we do big shows in the theater and people will come, and that's the way it's supposed to be. Now it's how are we part of this larger ecosystem?
Yep. Yep.
And that is so encouraging to me. And there's a whole raft of leadership coming up that thinks that way. And I find that very, very exciting. There are lots of changes that are. The conclusion is unclear. The jury's out. What a work-life balance is, we were just talking about, right? What makes up a work day? What makes up a work week? That is. That's going to continue to evolve. In many instances, I think it'll mean that organizations have to do less, have to do fewer productions, perhaps.
Yep.
And we'll have to figure out a way to make that work. Certainly, online digital is going to continue to be at least a portion of what we do, and so people with those skills and those abilities and thoughts.
That's a great point.
And there's this movement about right now that is pushing philanthropy and governance, trying to separate those. It's always been a fuzzy line.
Yes, it has. Yep.
And God bless those on our boards who are also giving generously, but they're not the same thing. Philanthropy and governance are not the same thing. And there's a lot of conversation going on in the field right now about how those can and should be separated. And if anybody had the easy answer to that one, we would have already come up with.
No. I mean, to put it in plain language, at least from what I've seen, very often the programming and the productions can be geared towards those who are giving the most money, and those tend to be older, more conservative people. And at a certain point, you can only do so many Swan Lakes. The creativity has got to evolve. David, thank you so much for your time. I cannot express how valuable this has been, and hopefully you'll come back and do something else with us.
Happy to, Liza. Thank you for the invitation.